Montana, 1873. Snow on the high passes and a single ridge of pine standing black against a sky going copper at the edges. Follow the road up, past a cold, dark cabin where no smoke rises, higher to a second cabin where smoke does. Inside, a large woman bends over a cast-iron stove, sleeves pushed back, hands sure. She has come a long way to be here. She does not yet know what is buried under a neighbor's hearth. Now turn. Down in the valley a wagon climbs, wheels grinding the frozen ruts. And on the seat a man in a good coat smiling, the way men smile when they already hold the papers. He has done this before. 5 families gone. 1 grave dug from a riding accident that was no accident at all. She wipes her hands. She hears the wheels. And on a mountain that has buried everything it ever loved, 2 people, who were called too much, are about to find out exactly how much they are. The mountain remembered every woman who had climbed it. 5 of them. 5 faces. 5 sets of footprints in the spring mud going up, and 5 sets coming back down faster, lighter, like the mountain itself had spit them out. Garrett Thorne stood on his porch and watched the valley swallow the last one. Sarah, from Massachusetts, 1 day. That was the record now, the record for leaving. She had stepped off the stage that morning, looked at him once, and said the truest thing anyone had said to him in years. I cannot do this. She did not even see the cabin, did not climb the ridge, just turned around and got back on the same stage that brought her, and the driver did not even bother to unhitch the horses. Garrett did not blame her. That was the worst part. He never blamed any of them, because he had seen his own face in the shaving mirror. The scar splitting his left eyebrow where a mule had caught him at 19. The nose that pointed slightly wrong, rearranged by a horse that disagreed with being saddled. The beard that had stopped being a choice somewhere around year 10 and become a fact like weather. The hands. God, the hands. Big as skillets. Knuckles scarred white from 43 years of sharp things and hard surfaces and the long disagreement between human skin and a frontier that did not care if you bled. I was a big man. Too big. Built without consultation. Assembled from whatever the mountains had lying around and left to stand. Doorways negotiated with him. Chairs requested advance warning, and women crossed the street. He went back inside. The cabin was clean because he had cleaned it. For Sarah. The way he had cleaned it for the 4 before her. He had swept the floor and aired the blankets and set a jar of wild iris on the table, blue petals, already going soft at the edges. He looked at the flowers for a long moment. Then he threw them in the fire. The petals curled and blackened and were gone, and Garrett Thorne sat down in the chair that knew his weight and listened to the largest silence in the Montana Territory settle back over his life like snow. He was done. That was the decision. No more letters, no more cleaning, no more iris in a jar. A man learned eventually, even a slow one, even a big one. 5 times the world had sent him an answer, and the answer was always the same. Not you. Now let me tell you about the letter that came in March. Because everything turns on the letter. And the man who wrote the advertisement that started it was not Garrett at all. It was his brother. Silas Thorne was the middle of the 3 Thorne men, and the only one of them with the particular kind of optimism that survives being wrong. He was 35, lean where Garrett was broad, quick where Garrett was still, and he had a habit of fixing things that were not his to fix. The mail order advertisement had been his idea. He had written it the winter before at the table in Garrett's cabin, with Garrett sitting across from him saying no, no, and Silas writing anyway. Wanted, a wife, for a mountain man of good character and steady hands. Honest work, fair shelter, a hard land, but an honest one. He had not described Garrett's face. Silas was optimistic, not foolish. The youngest, Thorne Amos, was 30, and said even less than Garrett, which was a thing most people did not believe was possible until they met him. Amos lived for the animals. The horses knew his voice better than they knew their own names. He had read the advertisement over Silas's shoulder, said nothing, and gone back out to the barn. So that was the three of them. Three brothers on three stretches of the same high valley, 16 years into building something out of granite and weather and stubbornness. Garrett's place on the ridge, Silas a half-mile down the slope, Amos closest to the creek where the horses could drink. And in those 16 years, not one of them had married. The land was hard on men. It was harder on the idea of a woman wanting to share it. The advertisement ran in papers across 4 states. 5 women answered it. 5 women came. And you know already how that went. After Sarah, Silas stopped suggesting things. Even Silas. He came up the ridge the evening she left, sat down across from his brother, and did not say a word about wives or letters or trying again. He just drank his coffee and watched the fire and left when the moon came up. Some things even an optimist lets die. Winter came down like a fist. The snow sealed the passes. The valley shrank to 3 cabins, and the white space between them and the world went quiet in the way only a Montana winter can go quiet, which is the quiet of a held breath of a thing waiting. Garrett spent it alone. He fed the animals. He mended what broke. He watched the sunset perform every evening in colors that hurt to look at, copper and violet and that deep aching gold that only existed in this valley at this hour, and he watched it the way a man watches something he has decided he is not allowed to want. Beauty experienced alone is just another kind of pain. He had learned that one a long time ago. Then it was March. The thaw started in the high passes, and a timber hauler came up the ridge road with a letter in his coat. A letter Garrett had not written to anyone. I was not expecting correspondence. He stood in his doorway, holding the envelope, and felt something in his chest he did not have a name for and did not trust. He almost did not open it. He opened it. It was from a woman named Maeve Donnelly. She was from Iowa. She was 34 years old, and she had seen his advertisement. Not the original one. A reprint. Some Iowa paper had picked it up and run it again the way papers did with curiosities, and her letter explained this in the first line with a dryness that made Garrett read it twice. Because Maeve Donnelly did not write the way the others had written. The others had written about themselves the way women present their best china. Polished, careful, every good quality turned to catch the light. He understood it. He did not hold it against them. It was what the world taught a woman to do. Maeve's letter had no polish on it at all. It had facts, delivered plain, with a bluntness that Garrett found alarming and refreshing in roughly equal measure, the way you might find a cold creek alarming and refreshing if you fell into one. She wrote that she was not pretty. She wrote it flat the way you would write the weather. She wrote that she was 34, and that in Iowa, a woman of 34, who had never married, was a thing people had stopped asking about. The way you stop asking about a field that never came in. Her own mother had quietly let the subject drop years ago. There was a particular kind of silence, she wrote, that a family builds around a daughter nobody chose. She had lived inside that silence a long time. She wrote that she was large, not tall. Large. She used the word the way other people used it about her when they thought she could not hear. She had spent her whole life being the woman who took up too much room in a world that preferred its women small and quiet and easy to overlook. And then she wrote about what she could do. She could cook, not passably. She wanted to be clear about this, she wrote, because it was the one thing in her life she had never once been told was too much. She could make a meal out of nearly nothing, and a feast out of nearly anything. She could bake bread that would make a grown man forget his own name. She could preserve and poke and cure and run a kitchen the way a general runs a campaign. She could carry water and split wood and walk distances that broke women half her size, because her size was not a weakness. Her size was fuel. It was foundation. It was the architecture of a woman built to last instead of to be looked at. She did not expect romance, she wrote. She did not expect to be admired. She expected work and shelter and the plain dignity of being treated like a person instead of a disappointment. And then the last line. Garrett read it. Then he read it again. Then he set the letter down on the table and stood at the window for a while, looking at nothing. At the white valley, at the snow, letting go of the passes. I understand you have trouble keeping wives. I have trouble being wanted. Perhaps our troubles fit each other. He sat down. He found a pencil. He wrote the shortest letter of his life. It was one word. Come. He did not tell Silas. He did not tell Amos. He did not clean the cabin or air the blankets or even consider the iris, which would not bloom for 2 more months anyway. He had learned that lesson. Preparation was a thing you did when the ending was still in doubt, and the ending was never in doubt. She would come, she would look at him, and she would leave. 6 times now. He could survive 6. He had survived 5. He told himself this all the way through the rest of the thaw, and he almost believed it. She arrived on a Tuesday in April. The stage stopped at the trading post down in the valley where the road gave up trying to climb and let the mountains take over. Garrett drove the wagon down to meet it. He had not shaved. He had not trimmed the beard. He wore the same coat he wore to haul timber, because there was no point dressing up for an outcome you already knew. The stage door opened, and Maeve Donnelly stepped down. She was exactly what her letter had promised. Garrett would give her that before anything else. She had not polished a single word. She was large, not tall, wide and solid and present. The way a stone wall is present, the way the mountain itself was present. She stood on the platform in a plain brown dress that fit her instead of apologizing for her. And she had one bag, and she set it down beside her and looked at the man who had written her one word. Her face was round, reddened by the wind off the open road. Her brown hair was pinned back with the brisk efficiency of a woman who considered hair an obstacle and not an ornament. And her eyes were hazel green with flecks of gold in them, and they were sharp. Sharp. The way a good knife is sharp. The eyes of a woman who had spent 34 years watching the world from the outside edge of it and had grown a kind of vision other people never needed to grow. She looked at Garrett the way a builder looks at a piece of ground. Not what is wrong with it, what could be done with it, the way nobody had ever looked at him in his life. Garrett stood there, 6'6" of scarred mountain man, and he could not for the life of him think of a single thing to say. She said it first. You are bigger than I expected. and his mouth, which had failed him for the entire wagon ride, betrayed him completely. "So are you." The words were out before his brain could catch them. He heard them land. He saw them hang in the cold air between them, and he wished with everything in him that he could reach up and stuff them back behind his teeth. 5 women had crossed the street from him. He had just told the 6th one she was big, to her face, in the first 10 seconds. Maeve Donnelly looked at him. A long moment passed, long enough for Garrett to start composing the apology, long enough for him to start calculating whether the stage had left yet, whether she would simply turn and climb back into it, whether this would be the new record, 10 seconds the fastest the mountain had ever produced. And then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the careful, measured, performed laugh of a woman doing what is expected of her in mixed company. A real laugh, full and deep, coming up out of a body that had plenty of room to make it a sound that rolled out across the trading post yard and bounced off the granite and came back. It was the loudest, least apologetic, most genuinely delighted laugh Garrett Thorne had ever heard in his life. "Well," she said, still laughing, wiping at one eye, "at least we will not have to worry about fitting through doorways together." And something happened in Garrett's chest that had not happened in a very long time. He did not have a name for that one either, but it did not hurt. That was the strange part. For the first time in longer than he could remember, a thing happened in his chest, and it did not hurt. He picked up her bag. It was heavier than it looked. Books he would learn later. Most of it was books. I helped her up onto the wagon seat. She settled her weight and the boards creaked, and she did not flinch at the sound, did not apologize for it, did not pretend it had not happened. She had made her peace with creaking boards a long time ago. About 20 years ago, she would tell him later. "You make your peace with it," she would say, "or you spend your whole life standing up." He climbed up beside her. The wagon sat lower on its springs than it had on the way down. 2 large people. 1 small wagon. He clicked his tongue and the horses started up the ridge road, and for the first mile, Maeve Donnelly did not say anything at all. She was looking at the pines climbing the slopes, at the snow still tucked in the blue shadows under the trees, at the valley falling away below them as the road climbed the whole great bowl of it, opening up and the afternoon light coming down through the high air. The way light only comes down in the mountains, clean and gold and almost solid, like you could hold it in your hand. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is remote," Garrett said. I had to say it. He made himself say it. Because this was the part where they always started to understand. This was the part where the beauty wore off and the distance set in. "The nearest town is 2 hours," he said. "The snow closes the road 5 months out of the year. You will hear nothing up here but wind, and animals, and me, and I do not talk much." He waited for it. The first crack, the first flicker of doubt in the corner of the eye. He had watched it happen 5 times. He knew the shape of it. Maeve Donnelly was quiet for a moment, looking out at the valley. Then she said something he was not ready for. "I have been surrounded by people my entire life," she said. "People who look straight through me. Like I was a window, like there was something more interesting on the other side of me that they were trying to see." She turned and looked at him. "Silence," she said, "sounds like an improvement." Garrett drove. He did not answer. He could not have answered, because she had just described a thing he had felt his whole life and had never once heard another living person put into words. Look through, like a window, like the world kept trying to see past you, to something better. He had thought he was the only one. They reached the cabin as the sun started its long slide toward the western peaks. She climbed down from the wagon. She stood in the yard, and she looked at the cabin the way the five before her had looked at it. Garrett braced himself. I knew what they saw. He had watched them see it. They saw isolation. They saw the end of the world. They saw 3 rough rooms and a stone chimney, and 16 years of a bachelor living the way bachelors live, and they saw everything they had left behind, every town and every neighbor and every easy comfort, and they saw it all very far away and getting farther. That was what the cabin showed people. But Maeve Donnelly stood in the yard, and she tilted her head, and she did not see any of that. She saw a kitchen. Does the chimney draw well? She asked. Garrett blinked. It does, he said. Is the root cellar dry? Mostly. You have a proper stove. Cast iron. She nodded. Once. The nod of a woman filing information for later use. And then she walked toward the cabin, and she did not wait to be invited, and she went inside. Garrett followed, ducking through his own doorway the way he always did. He found her standing in the kitchen. One hand laid flat on the cold cast iron of the stove, the way a musician lays a hand on a fine instrument. She was looking at it, reading it, already he could tell, rearranging it in her mind. This will do, she said. She turned and looked around the room, the neglect of it, the 16 years of a man feeding himself because he had to, and not because he cared to. The cabin needs work, she said. The kitchen needs a system. The pantry needs organizing. And you, she looked at him. When did you last eat something that was not burned or raw? Garrett opened his mouth. He thought about it. He genuinely thought about it, and he could not come up with an answer. And the fact that he could not come up with an answer was itself the answer. I do not remember, he said. Sit down, said Maeve Donnelly. And Garrett Thorne, 6'6", 43 years old, master of his own mountain, sat down at his own table, in his own kitchen, and took orders from a woman who had been inside his house for 4 minutes. She cooked. She moved through his kitchen like she had built it. She found things he did not know he owned. She found herbs growing wild just outside the cabin door, the ones he had been walking past for 16 years without ever once thinking of them as food, and she came back in with a handful of green and a look on her face that said the world was simply full of things if you bothered to see them. She made a stew. The smell of it filled the cabin. Then it filled the yard. And out in the barn, half a mile of habit away, Amos Thorne's horses lifted their heads and pressed their noses to the window, because something was happening on that mountain that had not happened in 16 years. The cabin smelled like a place a person might want to be. She set a bowl in front of him. Garrett ate. He stopped chewing after the first bite, not because it was bad, because it was the best thing he had ever put in his mouth in his entire life, and his body needed a moment, an actual physical moment, to understand what was happening to it before it could go on operating. Is it acceptable? Maeve asked, but her eyes were sharp with something. Amusement. She knew exactly what the stew was. She knew exactly what his face was doing, because she had seen that face on every single person she had ever cooked for, and it was the one place in all the world where she had never once been told she was too much. In a kitchen, Maeve Donnelly was not too big. In a kitchen, she was exactly enough. It is acceptable, Garrett managed, and she smiled. Not the careful smile of a woman trying to be chosen. The plain, satisfied smile of a person who has finally arrived somewhere her particular gifts are wanted. She did not leave that night. That was the first thing, the simplest thing. And in 16 years of his life, and 5 women before her, it was the thing Garrett Thorne had stopped believing was possible. She did not leave. She unpacked her one bag in the small room off the kitchen. And yes, it was mostly books, and Garrett carried them in for her and set them down carefully, because she handled them like they mattered. And that night he lay awake in the dark, listening to the new sound of another person breathing somewhere under his roof. Now, here is where I have to tell you the part she did not know yet. Because Maeve Donnelly had come up that mountain believing she understood the arrangement. A man had advertised for a wife. She had answered. She had come. It was a transaction, plain and clear, and she had made her peace with plain transactions a long time ago. Better an honest transaction than a lifetime of that silence, back in Iowa. What she did not know was that the man who wrote the advertisement was not the man whose stew she had just cooked. She found it out the next morning. Silas came up the ridge. He came up because Amos had ridden down at first light to tell him a thing he could barely believe himself, which was that there was smoke coming from Garrett's chimney at dawn, cooking smoke, and there was a woman's washing on the line. So Silas came up the ridge at a near gallop, and he came through the door without knocking, the way the brothers always did, and he stopped dead, because there was a woman standing in his brother's kitchen with a wooden spoon in her hand, and she was large and plain and entirely unbothered, and she looked at Silas, the way she looked at everything, like she was measuring it. And Silas, who had optimism but not always sense, said the thing you should never say. He said, "You actually came." Maeve set down the spoon. "You actually came," Silas said again, grinning, looking past her at Garrett. "I wrote that advertisement a year ago. I never thought." And then he stopped, because he saw Maeve's face change. "You wrote it," Maeve said. It was very quiet. Silas, who was beginning to understand that he had walked into the middle of something, looked from Maeve to Garrett and back. He started. "You wrote the advertisement," Maeve said. She turned and looked at Garrett, and the sharpness in those hazel eyes had gone somewhere else now. Somewhere harder, somewhere that had 34 years of being a window behind it. "Which one of you," she said, "did I answer?" The kitchen was very still. Garrett stood up from the table, slowly, the way a mountain would stand up if a mountain could. "I answered your letter," he said. "I wrote the word. I wrote, 'Come,' but you did not write the advertisement." "No." "Then, who am I marrying?" Maeve said. "The one who advertised, or the one who wrote?" And there it was. The thing Garrett had not thought through, because he had never once let himself believe she would actually arrive, let alone stay the night, let alone stand in his kitchen the next morning, demanding to know the shape of the thing she had come into. Silas, to his credit, tried. "It was meant for Garrett," he said. "The advertisement. I wrote it for him. He would not write it himself, so I—" "Stop," Maeve said. He stopped. She looked at the 2 brothers, the lean, optimistic one who fixed things that were not his to fix, the vast, silent one who had written her a single word and then she now understood, had spent the night braced for her to leave. And she understood something else, standing there. She understood it the way she understood everything, fast and from the outside, and with no one having to tell her. She understood that she had walked into a family and not a transaction, and a family had cracks in it. A family had a brother who advertised, and a brother who refused, And somewhere in the refusing was a reason. And the reason was not going to be small. She looked at Garrett. "Why would you not write it yourself?" she said. And Garrett Thorne, who did not talk much, who had told exactly 5 women the truth about the mountain and watched all 5 of them leave, looked at this 6th woman in his kitchen and gave her the only true answer he had. "Because I am the reason they leave," he said. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Silas looked at the floor, and Maeve Donnelly stood with the morning light coming through the window behind her, and she did not say anything for a moment. She was looking at Garrett, reading him. The scar through the eyebrow, the beard like weather, the hands, the size of him taking up the whole side of the room, and the eyes. The brown eyes that did not match the rest of him at all, that were kind in a way the rest of him had never been allowed to be. She had seen a great many things looked through in her life. She knew the difference between a thing that was empty and a thing that was simply waiting. And she made a decision. You could see her make it. It crossed her face the way weather crosses a valley fast and then settled. But she did not say it yet. What she said was, "I need to see the rest of it, the whole place, before I decide anything. Show me what I would be staying for." So Garrett showed her. He showed her the 3 rooms. The stone fireplace big enough to heat the whole structure. The porch that faced west where the sunset did its work every evening. He showed her the root cellar that was mostly dry and the barn where Amos's horses still had their noses pressed to the glass, watching her, and he introduced her to Amos, who said 4 words total and meant all of them. And he showed her the ridge, the view of the valley, the whole great bowl of the world falling away below the cabin, and the far blue mountains on the other side, and the sky over all of it, enormous, the kind of sky that made a person feel either very small or strangely free, depending on what they had come up the mountain carrying. Maeve looked at all of it, and then, because the road down to the trading post passed by it, Garrett had to drive her past the Wells place. It sat lower on the slope. A good cabin, better built than most, but the windows were dark and the chimney was cold, and there was a wrongness to it, the particular wrongness of a house where something has stopped. "Whose is that?" Maeve asked. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Ezra Wells," he said. "He had the place 16 years, same as us. Came up the same spring we did," had Maeve said. She did not miss words. She never missed words. "He died," Garrett said. "This past winter. They said he was thrown from his horse, up on the high trail in the snow. They found him at the bottom of the rocks." Garrett looked at the dark, cold cabin as they passed it, and then he said the thing. The small thing, the one line that did not seem like much when he said it, that a person could have heard and let go by, except that Maeve Donnelly was not a person who let things go by. "Ezra Wells rode that trail for 16 years, Garrett said. "In every kind of weather. I never once saw a horse get the better of him." The wagon rolled on. Maeve looked back at the Wells cabin until the road turned and the pines hid it. She did not say anything, but something had gone into those sharp hazel eyes. A small thing, a snag. The kind of snag a mind like hers could not leave alone, the way you cannot leave a loose thread alone once your fingers have found it. A man rides a trail for 16 years, and then one winter the horse wins. She filed it, the way she filed everything, for later. They got back to the cabin as the light was going gold, and this was the moment. Garrett knew it was the moment. He had been driving toward it all afternoon with a feeling in his chest like a held breath. She had said she would decide. She had seen the whole place now, the remoteness, the distance, the cold, dark wrongness of the Wells cabin down the slope, the size of the silence up here. He had shown her everything, the way he had shown the five before her. Now she would do what they all did. He stopped the wagon in the yard. He did not look at her. He looked at the sunset starting up over the western peaks, copper and violet, and that deep aching gold. You are staring at it like it owes you money, Maeve said. Garrett almost smiled. I like the sunset, he said. You like it alone, she said. That is a different thing. He turned and looked at her. She was not looking at the sunset. She was looking at him, looking at it. And there was something in her face he had not seen on another human face in a very long time, maybe ever. And it took him a moment to understand what it was. It was not pity. He knew pity. He had been handed pity his whole life like a coin. It was not the romantic thing either, the thing out of the dime novels, and he was grateful for that because he would not have known what to do with it. It was recognition. It was the look of one window recognizing another. The other five left, he said. He said it flat. The way you report a harvest. He needed her to know that he knew. He needed to say it before she did. I know, Maeve said. The man at the trading post told me. 5 brides, 5 departures. He called you the worst investment in matrimony the territory had ever produced. Garrett let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That is accurate, he said. Do you know why they left? Maeve asked. Because I am too much, Garrett said. Too big, too rough, too far from everything, too much. And Maeve Donnelly was quiet for a long moment. The sun was halfway down the sky now, the whole valley filling up with gold and shadow, the far peaks burning at their tips. They left, she said slowly, because they were looking for something you are not. Garrett waited. They were looking for a smaller life, Maeve said. A closer town, a house that fit inside the world they already understood, a man they could fit inside it too. And there is nothing wrong with that. It is most of what people want, a life the right size to carry. She looked out at the valley, at the enormous sky, at the whole great open bowl of the world below them with room in it for anything. I was never looking for that, she said. Her voice was very steady. I was looking for a place where being too much was not a problem. Because I have been too much my entire life. Too large, too plain, too sharp, too present in a world that wanted me to take up less room and make less noise and be easier to look past. She turned and looked at him, at all of him, the size of him against the burning sky. And here you are, she said. Too much, on a mountain that is also too much, with a sky over it that is too much. The first star came out over the eastern peaks. There is enough room here, Maeve Donnelly said, for both of us, for all of however much of us there is. Garrett Thorne sat very still on the wagon seat, because no one had ever said that to him. In 43 years. Not his brothers who loved him but had never needed to say it. Not the 5 women who came and saw the size of his life and turned back toward smaller ones. Not anyone. There is enough room. 4 words. The exact opposite of everything the world had ever told him. And everything the world had ever told her, and he understood, sitting there in the dying gold light, that she was not talking about the cabin or the valley or the mountain at all. You are not going to leave, he said. It was not a question. It was a thing he was finding out as he said it. I am not going to leave, Maeve confirmed. And then because she was who she was, she added, "Your cabin needs too much work, and your diet is a humanitarian crisis. Leaving now would be irresponsible." Garrett laughed. It surprised him. It came up out of somewhere deep, somewhere that had been shut a long time, a real laugh, the kind that knocks dust loose, and he could not remember the last time he had made that sound. It felt like finding a room in his own house that he had forgotten was there. She climbed down from the wagon. The boards creaked. She did not apologize. She stood in the yard with the sunset behind her, and she looked back up at him. This large, plain, extraordinary woman who had reorganized his kitchen and matched his bluntness with her own, and said the truest thing anyone had ever said to him, all in the space of a single day. "But I have one condition," Maeve said. Garrett went still again. Here it was. There was always a condition. With the world there was always a price, and he braced himself for it, because the day had been too good, and good days had taxes. "Name it," he said. "I will stay the winter," Maeve said. "One winter. And in that winter I want to find out which one of you actually wants a wife." Garrett looked at her. "Not a cook," Maeve said. "Not a housekeeper. Not a pair of hands to fix what 16 years of bachelors broke. Those are easy to want. Any man can want those." She held his eyes. "I have been wanted for what I can do my whole life," she said. "In the kitchen, in the field. I have never once been wanted for the fact that it was me doing it. So, one winter, and by spring I will know whether there is a man up here who wants Maeve Donnelly, or just a man who wants his floors swept and his supper hot." The sun went down behind the western peaks, and Garrett Thorne, standing in the blue, gathering dark on the mountain that had spit out 5 women before her, looked at the 6th one, the one who was not going to leave. The one who had just asked him for the one thing he was not sure he knew how to give, which was not work and not shelter, but the simple, terrifying act of being truly seen and wanted anyway. "All right," he said. One word again. It was how he answered the things that mattered. "All right." She nodded. Once. The matter settled, and she turned and walked into the cabin to start supper. And the creak of the door and the clatter of the stove and the smell of wood smoke and food came out into the yard where Garrett still stood. He looked down the slope, at the Wells cabin, dark and cold in the last of the light. A man rides a trail for 16 years, and then the horse wins. He did not know yet why that line had snagged in him the way it had snagged in her. He did not know that down in that dark cabin under a hearthstone, Ezra Wells had laid with his own hands 16 years ago. There was a thing waiting that would tear the whole valley open before the winter was through. He did not know that the man holding the papers on the Thorne brothers' land, a banker named Josiah Crane, who had smiled at him just that morning down at the trading post, had reasons of his own for wanting these mountains empty of the men who knew them. I did not know any of it yet. He knew only that there was smoke coming from his chimney, and a light in his window, and a woman under his roof who was not going to leave. For tonight, that was enough. For tonight, on a mountain that had been cold for 16 years, it was more than enough. Garrett Thorne climbed down from the wagon, and he went inside into the warmth and the light and the smell of something cooking. And behind him, the last of the sun let go of the high peaks, and the first hard stars came out over the Montana territory, sharp and clear and very far away. And the mountain held them, both of them, for now. The winter came down on schedule, the way winter always did in that valley, without asking and without mercy. And Maeve Donnelly went to work, not on the man, On the kitchen first, because the kitchen was the thing she understood, and a woman starts with what she understands. She hung herbs from the ceiling beams. She scrubbed 16 years of bachelor neglect out of the corners. She built a system in the pantry that only she understood jars in an order that made sense to her hazel eyes and to nobody else. And when Garrett reached for the wrong shelf, she redirected his enormous hand the way a river redirects a log. Firmly, without malice, with the absolute certainty of a woman who had found her 1 square foot of the world where she ruled. "You can help outside," she told him. "Inside is mine." He did not argue, partly because she was right, partly because arguing with Maeve was like arguing with weather. Theoretically possible, practically a waste of a perfectly good afternoon. So the days found their shape. He chopped, she cooked, he hauled, she organized. The cabin began to smell like a place a person lived in on purpose, and not just a place a man waited out his life in. And every evening the sun set. They started watching it together. Neither of them decided to. It just happened the way things happen between two people who have stopped expecting good things and are therefore caught completely off guard when one arrives. He would come in from the barn. She would come out from the kitchen. And they would stand on the porch, the big silent man and the large sharp woman, and watch the western peaks catch fire. He did not talk much. She had known that going in. What surprised her was that she did not mind. Because back in Iowa, silence had been a punishment. The silence of a family that had stopped asking. The silence of a chair at a dance that nobody crossed the room to claim. This silence was different. This silence had room in it. Now, about the condition. Maeve had said it plain that first night, one winter, and by spring she would know which one of them actually wanted a wife. Not a cook, not a pair of hands. Her. And the trouble was, she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer, and the answer was making her uneasy. Because the answer did not make sense. Silas was the obvious one. Silas came up the ridge most days on one excuse or another, and Silas could talk. Lord, the man could talk. He filled a room with words the way a stove fills it with heat, easy and warm and constant. He noticed things. He complimented the bread. He asked her questions about Iowa, and listened to the answers and asked more. He was lean and quick and handsome in the ordinary way, the way that didn't make children hide. If a woman were drawing up a list, Silas would be at the top of it. Maeve was very good at lists, and Silas was not the one. She knew it the way she knew everything, fast, from the outside, without anyone telling her. Because Silas talked to her the way you talk to an interesting stranger, warmly, generously, and from a safe distance. There was a window between them too, a nicer window, a window with the curtains open and the lamp lit, but a window. Garrett did not talk to her at all half the time, and there was no window. That was the thing she could not get past. That was the thing that woke her up at night in the small room off the kitchen. The talker kept her at arm's length with all his lovely words, and the silent one, who could barely look at her some mornings, who fled to the barn, the moment a conversation got too close to the bone, had no distance in him at all. When Garrett did look at her, he looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her, like she was the only solid thing in the room. It made no sense. The one who said the most felt the least. The one who said almost nothing felt like standing too close to a fire, which terrified her. "Stop it," she told herself, kneading bread harder than bread needed to be kneaded. "You came here to be sensible. You are 34 years old. You did not climb a mountain to go soft over a man who told you that you were big in the first 10 seconds. Except he had not meant it as an insult. She knew that now. Except, every time she caught him watching her from the barn door, she lost her place in whatever she was doing. Except, she kneaded the bread into submission and refused to finish the thought. The first crack in the silence came in November. A storm came down off the high peaks with no warning the way they did, and a calf got separated from the herd up in the timber. Amos came pounding on the door at dusk, 4 words as usual, calf is out there, and the 3 of them went up the slope into the white. Maeve went too. Garrett told her to stay. She did not stay. Because she could carry a lantern, and she could carry a calf, and she had spent 34 years being told what she could not do, and she had stopped listening to that particular sentence a long time ago. They found the calf in a drift half-frozen bawling, and it was Maeve who got to it first, Maeve who waded into the snow up to her thighs without a word of complaint. Maeve, who lifted the soaked, shivering animal against her chest and carried it back down the slope while the men broke trail ahead of her. Garrett watched her do it. He did not say anything. He was not a man who said things. But that night after the calf was warm in the barn, and Amos had gone home and Silas had ridden down the slope, still talking, Garrett stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Maeve wringing the snow out of her skirts by the fire, and he said a thing. You did not have to do that. I know, Maeve said. The other women would not have. Maeve looked up at him. I am not the other women, she said. And Garrett Thorne stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment, the firelight moving on his scarred face. And then he said the longest thing he had said to her since she arrived. No, he said, you are not. He went to bed. She finished with her skirts, and she sat by the fire a while longer than she needed to, telling herself it was to warm up, knowing it was not. Because the wall had cracked, and she had seen for 1 second through the crack, and what was on the other side was not empty at all. The mystery started with the chimney. It was a small thing. Most large things start as small things, which is something Maeve had always known, and most people had to learn the hard way. She was cleaning the stones around the fireplace, the deep cleaning, the kind that gets into 16 years of soot, and her hand found a draft where there should not have been a draft, behind a loose stone, low near the floor where the heat did not reach, and a person would never look unless they were the kind of person who cleaned a thing properly, all the way into the corners nobody thought about. Maeve was exactly that kind of person. She worked the stone loose, and behind it folded, small, yellowed, tucked into a gap that had been deliberately widened with a knife was a letter. Not Garrett's letter. Not her letter. A different letter. Older, the paper soft with damp and time. She knelt on the cold hearth and unfolded it with careful fingers, the way she handled her books, and she read it in the firelight. It was addressed to Garrett, in a hand she did not know, and it was not finished. To Garrett Thorne. If you are reading this, then I was right to be afraid. Maeve went very still. The letter went on. The hand got more rushed, as it went, the letters leaning harder, the way a hand leans when the person behind it is running out of either time or nerve. He came to me again about the deeds. He says the survey was wrong. He says the federal seal on my claim is not valid and never was. I know it is valid. I filed it myself in 72. I have the original. He does not know I have the original. If anything happens to me, the thing that matters is under the... And there, it stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-word almost. the pen dragging off the edge of the last letter like the writer had been interrupted, like someone had come to the door, like the letter had been folded fast and shoved behind a loose stone and left there unfinished, unsent for a winter and a death to find. Under the what? Maeve knelt on the hearth with the letter in her hands and her heart going hard against her ribs. The thing that matters is under the... And from somewhere down the slope, in a cabin standing dark and cold, a dead man's voice finished a sentence he never got to write. Maeve did not show Garrett the letter that night. She told herself it was because he was already asleep. That was a lie, and she knew it. She had folded the letter back along its old creases and tucked it inside one of her books between the pages, and she had sat awake half the night turning it over in her mind. Ezra Wells, 16 years on that trail, and then the horse wins. Except now there was a letter that said he had been afraid of a man who came about deeds and seals and a claim Ezra swore was valid. He came to me again, as in more than once, as in a man who would not stop. Maeve was good at lists, and she was building one now in the dark, and she did not like the shape it was taking. She showed Garrett in the morning. He read it standing at the window in the gray dawn light, his big hands holding the soft old paper like it might come apart, which it might. She watched his face. There was not much to read on it. There never was, but she had learned to read the little there was. She watched it go hard. "Where did you find this?" he said. "Behind a stone. In the chimney. He hid it where no one would clean." Garrett read it again. "Ezra wrote this," he said. "That is his hand. I have seen it on 100 bills of sale." "He was afraid," Maeve said, "of someone. About his land." Garrett did not answer right away. "I was looking at the unfinished line. The thing that matters is under the..." And Maeve watched a thing move behind his eyes, slow, like a stone shifting at the bottom of a deep creek. "Under the," Garrett said quietly. "Under the..." "What?" said Maeve. And Garrett Thorne looked up from the letter, and out the window down the slope, toward a dark, cold cabin, where a dead man had laid a hearthstone with his own 2 hands 16 years ago. "I think I know," he said. "They went down to the Wells place that afternoon. The snow had stopped. The valley lay white and silent under a sky the color of pewter, and the Wells cabin sat there dark and wrong the way it had sat there since winter, the chimney cold, the windows dead." Garrett pushed the door open. It was not locked. Nobody locked doors on that mountain. The man who would steal from you up here was not the kind of man a lock would stop. Inside the cabin was as Ezra had left it. Dust on everything. A cup on the table, gone to mold. A book open and face down on the arm of a chair, the way a man leaves it when he means to come back and finish the page. He had meant to come back. Maeve stood in the doorway and felt the wrongness of it press on her chest. A whole life interrupted mid-sentence. Like the letter. Like everything that man had left behind. Garrett went straight to the hearth. He knelt down, this enormous man, folding himself down onto the cold stone, and he ran his scarred hands over the hearthstones one by one, pressing, testing the way Maeve had tested the stone in his own chimney. And one of them moved. The center stone, big, flat, set deep, and it rocked under his hand just slightly, the mortar around it, false dried mud, worked in to look like the real thing. Garrett got his fingers into the seam, and he lifted it. The stone came up, heavy, and underneath it in a hollow, scraped out of the cold earth, and lined with oilcloth to keep the damp out was a box. A tin box, the kind a man keeps important things in. Garrett lifted it out and set it on the dusty floor, and they both looked at it for a moment, neither of them touching it. Because some things you look at first before you open them, the way you look at a thing you cannot take back. Then, Maeve knelt down beside him in the cold and the dust, and she opened it. Papers. A deed first. Ezra Wells's original claim. The paper crisp and official. The federal land seal, pressed into the bottom of it, dark and clear, and unmistakably real. Filed in 1872, just like the letter said, the genuine thing. And under the deed, a ledger, a small book bound in dark leather. The cover, soft with handling. Maeve lifted it out. She opened it, and the sharp hazel eyes that had read the world from its outer edge for 34 years went still, and then went cold, and then went to Garrett's face. Because Ezra Wells had not just been afraid. Ezra Wells had been keeping records. Names, Maeve said. Her voice was very quiet in the dead cabin. Dates. Land claims. Look. She turned the ledger so Garrett could see. A list of names. Settlers. Men who had filed claims in the valley and the foothills and the country beyond. And next to each name a date and a notation in Ezra's cramped, careful hand. And next to the names a pattern. A terrible, patient pattern. Filed 71. Sealed disputed. Foreclosed 73. Filed 72. Sealed disputed. Sold under debt 74. Filed 70. Widow. Sealed disputed. Vacated 73. Over and over. The same shape. A man files an honest claim. His federal seal is suddenly called false, and then the land slides out from under him, foreclosed or sold or vacated into the hands of. Maeve turned the page. Into the hands of the bank. One bank. One name at the bottom of every transaction signing for the foreclosures, holding the disputed paper. Ending up with the land. J. Crane, the ledger said. Again and again. J. Crane. Who is J. Crane? Maeve said. And Garrett Thorne, kneeling on the cold floor of a murdered man's cabin, with a dead man's ledger open between them, felt the whole shape of it come together. At last, the smiling man at the trading post, the papers on his own land, the friend who rode a trail for 16 years and then one winter let the horse win. Josiah Crane, Garrett said. He holds the bank in town. He holds the paper on half this valley. Garrett looked at the ledger, at the patient list of stolen lives. And he holds the paper on us, Garrett said. The snow started again as they rode back up the slope. Maeve held the tin box against her chest the whole way, the deed and the ledger inside it. The proof that a man named Josiah Crane had spent years calling honest seals false and patiently, legally, bloodlessly, taking the mountains away from the men who knew them. Except it had not been bloodless. Not all of it, because Ezra Wells had figured it out. Ezra Wells had kept a ledger, and Ezra Wells had written, "I was right to be afraid," and then one winter on a trail he had ridden 10,000 times the horse had won. A man does not ride 16 years and then fall, Maeve thought. Not in the same week he writes a letter saying he is afraid. Not with a ledger like this hidden under his floor. That is not a fall, that is a silence. The kind somebody arranges. She did not say it out loud. Not yet. Some thoughts you hold until you are sure. But she looked at the back of Garrett's broad shoulders breaking trail ahead of her through the falling snow, and she knew he was thinking it too. They got back to the cabin, and they did not light the lamp right away. They sat at the table in the gray failing light with the tin box between them, and the thing they had found sat in the room with them, like a sixth person, cold and heavy and impossible to send away. "What do we do?" Maeve said. Garrett was quiet for a long time. "I do not know yet," he said. "Crane is the bank. Crane is the law in that town near enough. The sheriff drinks on Crane's money. A judge comes through twice a year and stays in Crane's house when he does." He looked at the box. "A man takes this to that town," Garrett said, "and that man does not come back. The way Ezra did not come back." Maeve looked at him. "Then we do not take it to that town," she said. Garrett looked up. "There is law above a bought sheriff," Maeve said. "There is law above a bought judge. There are federal marshals who do not drink on Josiah Crane's money and do not sleep in Josiah Crane's house. That seal in this box is a federal seal. Crane has been forging the authority of the United States government to steal land. That is not a town matter." She put her hand flat on the tin box. "That is a hanging matter," Maeve said. "For him, if it reaches the right hands." And in the gray dark of the cabin, Garrett Thorne looked at this woman. This large, sharp, extraordinary woman who had come up his mountain to be a wife and had found a murder under a hearthstone instead, and who was not afraid, who was already 3 steps ahead, who was already building the list. "But getting it to the right hands," Garrett said slowly, "means surviving long enough to send it, and Crane already knows you are here. He saw you at the trading post. He holds my paper. He is going to wonder what Ezra's friends are doing now that Ezra's friends have a new pair of sharp eyes in the house." Maeve took her hand off the box. "Then we are careful," she said. "We copy nothing where it can be found. We say nothing in town. We let Josiah Crane go on thinking we are exactly what he believes we are. A worthless mountain man and the plain woman nobody wanted." She almost smiled. It was not a warm smile. "People like Crane," she said, "never expect anything from people like us. That is the one advantage of being looked through your whole life. Nobody watches a window." The fire that came was not a metaphor. It came in the deep of winter on a night when the cold had teeth, and it came the way these things come. Fast, in the dark, with men on horses who did not want to be seen. Maeve woke to the light wrong on the ceiling. Orange, flickering, moving. She was up and at the window before she was fully awake, and she saw at the barn, Amos's barn down by the creek, the roof already gone to flame, the fire roaring up into the black sky and throwing sparks across the snow, and the horses screaming. She did not think. There was no time to think. She was at Garrett's door, pounding it with the flat of her hand, and Garrett was already up, already pulling on his boots, and then they were out into the killing cold and running down the slope toward the light. The barn was an inferno. Amos was already there, must have come from his cabin nearest the creek, and he was hauling at the main door, fighting the wood, the heat driving him back, and inside the horses were wild with terror, throwing themselves against the stalls. "The door is jammed," Amos shouted. 4 words, and they cost him everything. It was not jammed. Maeve saw it in one glance, the sharp eyes cutting through the smoke and the panic. It was barred, from the outside, A length of timber dropped across the brackets and wedged tight. Someone had barred the horses in. Someone had wanted them to burn. Garrett got to the timber and heaved at it, and the bar came free, and the door swung wide, and the heat rolled out like a living thing, and the horses bolted past them into the snow, mad with fear. And one of them caught Silas, who had come down from his place at a dead run, and sent him sprawling into the dark. But there were 2 horses still inside, 2 that had not bolted, pinned in the back stalls by fallen timber, by smoke, by terror screaming, and the roof above them already burning, already starting to come down. Garrett went in. Of course he went in. He was a mountain. Mountains do not stop. And Maeve went in behind him. Because there were 2 horses and one of him, and she had carried a frozen calf down a mountain, and she could carry a panicked horse out of a fire, or she could die trying. And in that moment she found she did not particularly care which, as long as she was beside him when it happened. The smoke was a wall. The heat was a hand pressing on every inch of her. She could not see. She went by sound, by the screaming, and she found the second stall, by feel, and got the gate open, and got her whole considerable weight against the terrified animal, and shoved it toward the door, toward the cold, toward the air, and it broke past her and out into the snow. And then the roof came down, not all of it, a section, a burning beam, dropping out of the orange dark. And Maeve saw it come, and there was no time at all. And then a hand closed around her arm and yanked her backward off her feet with a strength that did not seem possible, and the beam came down where she had been standing in a roar of sparks. Garrett, I had her. He had her by the arm, and he was dragging her back out through the door, out into the snow, and they went down together in the cold white, the 2 of them large and gasping and alive, while behind them the barn folded in on itself and sent a column of fire roaring up into the stars. For a moment neither of them could speak, the cold and the heat and the smoke and their own hearts hammering. Then Maeve got up, because Silas was down in the snow, and the horses were scattered, and Amos was beating at the sparks that had caught the woodpile. She got up, smoke in her lungs, her skirt singed her hands black, and she went to work. She got Silas sitting up, his shoulder wrenched where the horse had caught him, but his head clear. She caught the nearest panicked horse by its halter, and her sheer size and steadiness held it until it stopped fighting. She moved through the chaos like the chaos worked for her, and Garrett, sitting in the snow where they had fallen, watched her do it. The barn burned down to its bones behind her, and in front of him, lit orange by the fire, black with soot, utterly unafraid, the woman the whole world had called too big was the biggest thing on that mountain, and the only thing holding it together. Her size was not a weakness. She had written that in a letter months ago in Iowa, and he had read it and not understood it. He understood it now. Her size was fuel. Her size was foundation. Her size had just walked into a fire and dragged 2 horses and very nearly herself out the other side. It was barred, Garrett said. He said it low when she came back to him when the worst of it was past, and Silas was on his feet, and the horses were gathered, and the fire was dying for lack of anything left to eat. The barn door, Garrett said. It was barred from the outside. I know, Maeve said. I saw. This was not an accident. I know that too, Maeve said. They stood in the snow and looked at the smoking ruin, the 2 of them, and the same thought sat between them, cold as the night. First Ezra, now this. Josiah Crane was no longer being patient. Things moved fast after the fire. They always do once the patient part is over. Because the next blow did not come on a horse in the dark. It came in daylight in words which Maeve would come to understand was the more dangerous of the two. It started in town. It always starts in town. Silas heard it first down at the trading post getting supplies with his arm still in a sling from the fire. He heard the way the talk stopped when he walked in. He heard the way men looked at him and then looked away. And he heard the story that was going around. The story somebody had started and was feeding the way you feed a fire you have set on purpose. The story was this. The Thorne brothers had bought themselves a woman. A big, plain woman from back east, paid for mail ordered, kept up on that mountain to cook and clean and serve 3 men who could not get a wife any honest way. It was indecent. It was unnatural. What kind of woman, the town wanted to know, sells herself to a mountain? What kind of men buy one? That was the first part, the cruel part. The part that took the truest, tenderest thing on that mountain, a lonely woman and a lonely man finding room for each other, and made it filthy. But that was not the dangerous part. The dangerous part was the second story riding in just behind the first, which was this: that Ezra Wells had not been thrown from his horse at all, that Ezra Wells had been killed, and that the man who killed him, everybody was beginning to say the man with the most, to gain the man whose land butted right up against Ezra's, the giant, violent mountain man who had been Ezra's nearest neighbor for 16 years. Garrett Thorne. Maeve heard it from Silas, who rode up the ridge gray face to tell them, and she felt the cold of it go all the way down. She understood it instantly. Of course she did. It was beautiful in its way. Evil always is when it is done well. Crane could not have the ledger come to light. He could not let anyone start asking why Ezra Wells had died. So he was answering the question before anyone could ask it. He was handing the town a murderer, a big one, a scarred one, a frightening one, who lived alone and had buried 5 marriages and looked exactly like the kind of man who would push a neighbor off a cliff. If the law ever did come asking about Ezra Wells, there would already be an answer, waiting polished and ready. Garrett did it. Everyone says so. He is framing you, Maeve said. She was pacing the kitchen, which she never did, the sharp eyes bright and hard. He killed Ezra, and now he is painting the murder onto you, so that if the truth ever surfaces, it lands on the wrong man. On you, the frightening one, the one this town was always ready to believe the worst about. Garrett stood very still by the fire. And here was the thing about Garrett Thorne, the thing Maeve was only now beginning to see all the way to the bottom of. He was not angry. He should have been angry. A man hears the whole town is calling him a murderer, calling the woman in his house a bought thing. He should burn with it. But Garrett just stood there, quiet, still, with something old and tired and terribly familiar settling over his scarred face. Because some part of him, Maeve realized, some deep-buried part, believed it. Not the murder. He knew he had not killed Ezra. But the rest of it. The verdict underneath the verdict. That he was a man the world was right to be afraid of. That he was too big and too rough and too frightening, that he ruined things by being near them. That of course they thought he was a killer, because what else would you think looking at a face like his? Maeve stopped pacing. She looked at him standing there, taking it, absorbing the town's cruelty, the way the mountain absorbed a hard season, like it was only weather, like he deserved it. And it broke something open in her. "You do not believe it," she said. "Tell me you do not believe it." Garrett did not answer. "Garrett," she said, "and The big man looked at the floor, and when he spoke his voice was low, and it came from somewhere very far down. "There is a reason the brides left," he said. "There is a reason this town will believe I am a killer. I have spent 43 years watching people decide what I am the moment they see my face. The town is not wrong about what I look like. Maybe they are not wrong about what is underneath it either." And Maeve Donnelly crossed the kitchen. She crossed it fast. This large woman who moved like weather, and she stood in front of him, closer than she had ever stood, and she made him look at her. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice was not soft. Maeve was not a soft woman. Her voice was fierce and low, and absolutely certain. "I have spent my whole life being told what I am," she said. "Too big, too plain, too much. I have watched 1,000 people decide who I was the second they saw me, and not one of them, not one ever bothered to find out if they were right." She put her hand flat against his chest, the first time she had ever touched him on purpose. "I found out," she said. "I climbed this mountain and I found out what you are. And you are not what the town sees. You went into a fire for 2 horses. You pulled me out of it with your bare hands. You wrote one word to a woman nobody wanted. And you have spent every day since braced for me to leave because you cannot believe anyone would stay." Her hand pressed against him fierce. "That is what you are, Garrett Thorne," she said. "I have done the finding out, and I will not stand in this kitchen and listen to you agree with people who never bothered." The fire cracked in the grate, and Garrett Thorne looked down at this woman with her hand on his chest, and her hazel eyes blazing up at him. And something happened in his face that Maeve had never seen there before, something that cracked the stillness all the way through. He believed her. For 1 second. For one cracked open second, the big silent man believed that he was not the thing the world had always told him he was. And it was the most frightening thing that had ever happened to him. She could see that, too. She could see the fear in it. Because if he was not the monster, then the loneliness had not been deserved. And if the loneliness had not been deserved, then 16 years of it had been for nothing, and that was a grief almost too big to hold. I did not say anything. He was not a man who said things, but he lifted one enormous scarred hand, slowly, and he laid it over hers where it pressed against his chest, and he held it there. That was all. In a story full of fires and ledgers and a town crying murder, that was the whole of it. A big man's hand closing over a woman's hand against his heart in the firelight, neither of them saying a word. It was enough. It was more than either of them had had in their whole lives, and it was enough. The letter from Crane came 3 days later. It came up the ridge with a hired rider who would not get off his horse, who handed it down to Garrett, and turned and rode back into the cold. Without a word, the way a man does when he has been told to deliver something and not to linger, Garrett opened it on the porch. Maeve watched his face as he read it. She had gotten good at his face, and she watched it close like a door. What she said. Garrett handed her the letter. It was polite. That was the worst of it. Josiah Crane wrote a polite, civilized, lawful letter, the kind a banker writes, and underneath every courteous word was a knife. The note of the Thorne brothers' debt, it said, had come due. Crane regretted the inconvenience, but circumstances being what they were, the bank could no longer extend the terms. The full sum was payable in 7 days. And there was a second paragraph. The second paragraph was about Ezra Wells. Crane wrote that he had heard the distressing talk in town. that as a friend to the whole valley, he felt it his duty to see the matter of poor Ezra's death properly investigated, that the circuit judge would be in town within the month, and that Crane intended to bring his concerns about Ezra's neighbor before him personally. His concerns about Ezra's neighbor, Garrett. Maeve read it twice, the way she read everything, and then she understood the full shape of the trap, and it was so complete, so airless, that for a moment she could not breathe. 7 days, she said. 7 days, Garrett said. In 7 days they lost the land. The note came, due, they could not pay it. Crane took the mountain, the way he had taken half the valley, legally, bloodlessly, with the stroke of a pen. And if they fought it, if they made any noise, if they so much as whispered the name in that ledger, then Crane brought his concerns about Ezra Wells to the judge, and the judge who slept in Crane's house would hear that the frightening mountain man, the one everyone already believed was a killer, had murdered his neighbor for his land. They could lose the farm quietly, or they could lose Garrett to a rope. Those were the 2 doors. Crane had built them both, and he had built them perfectly, and he had left no 3rd door at all. Maeve lowered the letter. The ledger could undo all of it. She knew that. The ledger and the deed and the federal seal, the proof of everything Crane had done, sitting right now in a tin box hidden in the cabin. That was the answer. That was the only answer. But using it meant getting it past a bought sheriff and a bought judge to a federal marshal who might be a week away or a month away or 100 miles away, and it meant doing it in 7 days while Josiah Crane watched the mountain while the whole town stood ready to call Garrett a killer. The moment he showed his face, while the man who had already murdered once to keep his secret knew exactly where the only people who could expose him were sleeping at night. 7 days. Maeve folded the letter along its creases, carefully, the way she folded everything, and she looked out at the valley white and silent under the winter sky, the dark ruin of the burned barn down by the creek, the cold dead Wells cabin further down the slope, where a good man had hidden the truth under his own hearth and died for it. 7 days to get the truth off this mountain, or lose everything they had found. The wind came up off the peaks, and somewhere down the slope, a loose timber in the burned barn shifted and fell, and Maeve Donnelly stood on the porch beside the largest, gentlest, most wrongly judged man in the Montana Territory, and began in the cold and the quiet to build the most important list of her life. The list had one thing at the top of it that nobody knew about. Not Garrett, not Silas, not Amos, not Josiah Crane, sitting warm in his bank in town, certain he had built 2 doors and left no 3rd. There was a 3rd door. Maeve had made it weeks ago, because here is the thing about a woman who has been looked through her whole life. She watches, she learns, and she does not wait for permission to be careful. The night they found the ledger, the night they sat at the table with the tin box between them and the fear sitting in the room like a 6th person, Garrett had said one thing that stuck in her like a splinter. He had said a man takes this to that town, and that man does not come back. So Maeve had not waited. The very next morning, while Garrett was out with what was left of the herd, Maeve had sat at the kitchen table with a pot of ink and her steadiest hand, and she had copied the ledger. All of it. Every name, every date, every disputed seal, and every foreclosure, and the one name at the bottom of all of them. J. Crane, J. Crane, J. Crane. She had copied it in her small, careful school-teacher's hand because that was the one inheritance. Her hard life had given her the ability to read and write better than most men in any town she had ever lived in. The plain woman nobody wanted had spent her lonely evenings with books, And now those lonely evenings were going to hang a man. She had copied the deed, too. She had drawn the federal seal as exactly as she could every line of it, and noted in the margin where the original was hidden. And then she had done the thing that mattered most. She had written a letter, not to the sheriff, not to the judge, to a man named Marshal Aldous Reeve, United States Marshal, whose name she had found in a 6-month-old newspaper lining the bottom of the pantry. A man who had broken a land fraud ring 2 territories over and been quoted, saying a federal seal was the signature of the nation itself, and he would see any man who forged one answer for it. Aldous Reeve did not drink on Josiah Crane's money. Aldous Reeve did not sleep in Josiah Crane's house. Maeve had sealed the copied ledger and the letter together, and she had given the package to the one person on that mountain nobody in town would think to watch. Amos. Amos, who said 4 words a day. Amos, who the horses trusted more than men. Amos, who could ride the high passes in his sleep and slip down out of the mountains by a trail no town rider knew and put a letter on the eastbound mail without a single soul in Cranestown ever knowing he had gone. She had told Amos one thing: ride until you find the federal mail. Not the town office, the federal mail. And do not tell anyone, not even your brothers. Not yet. And Amos, God bless his 4 words, had looked at her for a long moment with those quiet eyes that missed nothing, and he had said the only thing that needed saying. He killed Ezra. It was not a question. Yes, Maeve had said. And Amos had gotten on his horse and ridden into the mountains. That had been 12 days ago. 5 days before Crane's letter ever came up the ridge, which meant that right now, with 7 days on the clock, and the whole town crying murder, there was a copied ledger, somewhere out in the country, beyond the mountains, riding the federal mail, toward a man who did not answer to Josiah Crane. Maeve had not told Garrett, because if it failed, she did not want him to have hoped, and because a secret only stays a secret if the number of people holding it stays small. And because, if she was honest, in the deepest, most guarded room of herself, she was afraid that if she told him she had already acted, already moved the whole game, without asking, he would look at her the way men had always looked at a woman who did not stay in her square foot of the world. She was wrong about that. She would find that out. But for now, she carried it alone. The 3rd door hidden while the 7 days burned down. The 7 days did not burn quietly. On the 3rd day, the sheriff came up the ridge. He came with 2 men and a paper, and the paper was a warrant, and the warrant was for Garrett Thorne, on suspicion of the murder of Ezra Wells. Maeve saw them coming from the kitchen window. 3 riders climbing the road slow the way men ride when they are nervous about what waits at the top. She knew before they reached the yard. She always knew. Garrett, she said. He came to the window. He looked, and his face did the thing it did. It went still and tired and terribly unsurprised, the face of a man who has been waiting his whole life for the world to come and confirm what it always thought of him. The sheriff did not get off his horse at first. He read the warrant from the saddle, his voice carrying thin across the cold yard, and the words landed one by one like stones. Suspicion of murder. Ezra Wells. Garrett Thorne to be held in town, pending the judgment of the circuit court. The circuit court. The judge who slept in Crane's house. Garrett went out onto the porch. Maeve went with him. "You are not taking him," she said. The sheriff looked at her. He was not a cruel man, the sheriff. That was almost the worst of it. He was just a weak one, a man who drank on the wrong money and did the wrong men's bidding. because it was easier than the alternative, and he could not quite meet her eyes. "I have a warrant, ma'am." "Signed by who?" said Maeve. "The judge. The judge is not here yet. You said so yourself. He is not in town for 3 more weeks. So who signed it?" The sheriff's jaw worked, and the answer when it came was the answer she already knew. "A justice of the peace," he said, "acting on the complaint of a concerned citizen." "A concerned citizen," Maeve said. "Mr. Crane," said the sheriff, and there it was, out loud, in the cold yard, the name at the bottom of every foreclosure in a dead man's ledger, now signing the paper that would put the one man who could expose him behind bars where accidents happen, where a man might be found hanged in his cell before any judge ever heard a word. Maeve understood the whole of it then. Crane was not waiting 7 days. Crane had read his own letter back and realized 7 days was 7 days too many, that a cornered mountain man with nothing left to lose was a dangerous thing, and so he had moved early. Get Garrett off the mountain, get him into a cell, and let the rest take care of itself. Garrett, Maeve said, low, fast. Do not fight them. He looked at her. Do not give them a reason, she said. Do not give this town one more story about the violent mountain man. You go quiet. You go gentle. You let them see exactly what you are. Because she understood something the sheriff did not, and Crane did not, and even Garrett did not. The trap only worked if Garrett played the monster, if he fought, if he roared. If 3 nervous men with guns got to ride back to town and say he came at us like a bear, we had no choice. But a giant who goes quietly, a giant who holds out his scarred hands for the rope, without a word, who looks at the frightened sheriff with those impossibly kind brown eyes and does not resist. That was a different story. That was a story even a weak man might lie awake remembering. Garrett looked at Maeve for a long moment, and then he did the hardest thing she had ever asked anyone to do. He did nothing. He stood there, the biggest man on the mountain, and he let the smallest men in the valley put their hands on him, and he did not so much as close a fist. They bound his wrists. The rope looked like thread on him, and as they led him toward the horses, he turned his head and found her one last time across the cold yard. He did not say anything. He was not a man who said things. But his eyes said the thing. His eyes said all of it. And Maeve stood on the porch with her hands fisted in her skirts and made herself smile at him. A fierce, small, terrible smile. The smile of a woman who knows something the whole world does not. Trust me, the smile said. I have done the finding out, and I am not done yet. They took him down the mountain, and Maeve Donnelly turned and walked back into the cabin, and she did not cry because crying was a thing for later. And she sat down at the table where the whole nightmare had begun, and she began to count. 12 days since Amos rode out. The eastbound mail ran slow in winter. A letter to the marshal's territory. Days for it to reach him. Days for him to read it, to believe it, to act, to ride. If he rode at all. If he had not moved on. If the newspaper had been right about the kind of man he was. So many ifs. A whole list of ifs. And against the ifs, one hard fact. The judge was 3 weeks out. Crane had said so himself. 3 weeks before any court could try Garrett. 3 weeks. That was the window. That was the only thing standing between Garrett and a quiet death in a bought man's cell. Crane needed the judge to make it legal, to make the hanging lawful, to put the seal of the court on the murder he had already committed in his heart. Crane was a careful man. Crane liked his killings to look like accidents and his thefts to look like law. He would wait for the judge, which meant Garrett had 3 weeks to live, and the marshal had 3 weeks to come. Maeve looked at the two numbers, and then a third thing happened. The thing she had not counted on. The thing that nearly broke the whole list apart. Silas came up the ridge at a dead gallop, and Silas was carrying news, and the news was this. The judge was not 3 weeks out. The judge had been sent for by Crane, by Fast Rider, and the judge was coming early. Crane had told the town. It was out of his deep concern for justice, his wish to see poor Ezra's death resolved before the worst of the winter closed the passes for good. The judge would be in town in 4 days. 4 days, not 3 weeks. 4 days. Maeve stood in the kitchen and felt the floor tilt under her. Because 4 days was not enough. 4 days was nowhere near enough. The marshal could not cross that country in 4 days, even if he had read the letter the moment it landed. Even if he had saddled up that same hour. The whole plan, the third door, the copied ledger, riding the mail, all of it had been built on time she no longer had. Crane had changed the clock, and he had not even known there was a plan to ruin. He had simply moved fast because moving fast was what a cornered, clever man did, and in moving fast he had, without knowing it, outrun the one thing that could destroy him. 4 days, Silas said. His face was gray. They mean to try him in 4 days, Maeve, in Crane's town, before Crane's judge. And Maeve Donnelly stood very still in the kitchen. This was the moment. She knew it was the moment. The whole story had been climbing toward it, and now here it was the place where she found out what she was made of, the way she had found out what Garrett was made of. She could give up. The list said give up. The arithmetic said give up. 4 days against a country the marshal could not cross. The numbers did not work. The numbers said Garrett Thorne would hang lawfully before any help could come. Except Maeve Donnelly had spent her whole life being told what the numbers said about her. Too old to marry, too plain to choose, too big to want. The numbers had always said no. And she had climbed a mountain anyway. I have to tell you something, Maeve said. Silas looked at her, and she told him. All of it. The copy she had made, the letter to the marshal, Amos gone 12 days riding the high passes with the truth sewn into his coat, the third door that nobody had known about. Silas stared at her. You sent for a federal marshal, he said. Almost 2 weeks ago. Yes. Before any of this. Before the warrant. Before the judge. Yes, Maeve said. Because Garrett told me, a man who takes the truth to that town does not come back. So I did not take it to that town. I sent it over the mountains, to a man that town does not own. And Silas, Thorne the talker, the optimist, the man who fixed things that were not his to fix, looked at this woman his brother had very nearly let leave, and for once in his life he had no words at all. Then he found 4. You magnificent woman, he said. The judge came on the 4th day, and the trial, if you could call it that, was set for the morning after. They held it in the town hall, which was really just the largest room in the largest building which Crane owned, because Crane owned most things. They brought Garrett in from the cell in chains, and the whole town came to watch. Because the whole town had been told a story and the whole town wanted to see how it ended. Maeve sat in the front row. She had ridden down the mountain that morning in her plain brown dress, the one she had arrived in. She was not married yet. That was a thing she had not let herself think about, a thing waiting on the other side of this day. She had pinned her hair back with brisk efficiency. She had brought one thing with her, wrapped in oilcloth held in her lap. She did not look like much. She knew that. She had spent her whole life not looking like much. Nobody watches a window. The judge was exactly what she expected. A soft, heavy man in a good coat, a man who had slept in Crane's guest bed and eaten Crane's good food, a man whose verdict was written before he ever sat down. He banged his gavel, and the room went quiet, and the thing began. It went the way Crane had built it to go. A man testified that the Thorn place butted right up against Ezra Wells's land. True. A man testified that Garrett would profit if Ezra's claim came open. A lie, but a smooth one. A man testified that Garrett Thorne was known to be violent, that he had buried 5 marriages, that women fled from him, that he was a fearful sight, that everyone had always wondered about him. And Garrett sat in his chains and said nothing, because she had told him to say nothing, and because he was not a man who said things, and because some part of him, even now, even here, half believed every word of it. Maeve watched the town watch him. She watched them nod. She watched the story they had been fed settle over the room, comfortable, familiar, easy. The monster on the mountain. Of course, it made such a satisfying kind of sense. Then Crane himself rose to speak. Josiah Crane was a handsome man. That was a thing people forgot to mention about evil. He was well-dressed and well-spoken, and he had a warm, sorrowful way about him, and he stood up in that room and spoke about his dear lost friend Ezra Wells with such tender grief that women in the back dabbed their eyes. He spoke of duty. He spoke of justice. He spoke of his heavy heart at having to point the finger at a neighbor, but his conscience. He said his conscience would not let poor Ezra lie unavenged. It was a performance. It was a beautiful performance. And when he finished, the judge nodded gravely and reached for his gavel, and the verdict was 4 seconds away. Maeve Donnelly stood up. "Your Honor," she said. The room turned. The whole room. All those faces swiveling to the large plain woman in the brown dress standing in the front row. The bought woman. The mail-order woman, the one they had heard so much filthy talk about. The judge frowned. "This is not your place, madam. Sit down." "I have evidence," Maeve said. "Sit down. I have evidence in the death of Ezra Wells." Maeve said louder, her voice carrying to every corner of that owned room, "and I have evidence in a great many other deaths of property in this valley, and I will show it to this court, or I will show it to the next court and the next, until I find one that is not afraid of the man sitting in that chair pretending to grieve." And she pointed at Josiah Crane. The room made a sound, a low sound. The sound a crowd makes when the story it was told starts to come apart in its hands. Crane's warm, sorrowful face did not change. He was too good for that. But Maeve was watching his eyes, because she always watched the eyes, and in his eyes something flickered, something cold, something that had pushed a man off a trail in the snow and barred horses into a burning barn. "Your Honor," Crane said smoothly, "this poor woman is overwrought. She is the mountain man's companion." Of course she would say anything, too. "What is under your bank?" Maeve said. Crane stopped. It was the smallest thing, a half-second, a breath. But Maeve saw it, and so did the room. "I asked what is under your bank," Maeve said. "In your records, because Ezra Wells kept records too, Mr. Crane. Ezra Wells wrote down every claim in this valley you called false, every federal seal you said was forged when it was you forging. Every honest family you put off their land with a stroke of your pen." He wrote it all down, in a ledger. She lifted the oilcloth bundle from where it had sat in her lap. She unwrapped it, and she held up for the whole room to see a small book bound in dark leather. It was not the ledger. The real ledger was hidden where Crane's men would never find it. This was her copy, her careful schoolteacher's copy, every name and date and crime in her own steady hand. But the room did not know that, and Crane did not know that. Crane only knew that a dead man's records were being held up in the air in a room full of his neighbors, and that the careful airless trap he had built had just developed a crack he could not see the bottom of. Crane took a step forward. "That book is a fabrication," he said, and his warm voice had an edge in it now, the first edge anyone had heard. "That book proves nothing. A woman scribbling. Hand it to me and I will show this court it is." "No," Maeve said. "Hand it over." "It does not go to you," Maeve said. "And it does not go to this judge who sleeps in your house and eats at your table and signed a warrant for a man he never met on the word of the man who profits from his death. It goes to a court that is not yours, Mr. Crane." And the doors at the back of the town hall opened. The cold came in first, the winter air rolling down the center aisle. And then the sound. Boots, spurs, the particular weight of men who do not hurry because they do not have to. Maeve did not turn around. She had been waiting for this sound for 16 days. She had built her whole life around the hope of this sound, and she had not known until this exact moment whether it would ever come. It came. A voice spoke from the back of the room, dry, hard, unhurried. "I will take that ledger," the voice said. "As it happens, I have got the original already. A letter found me weeks back over the mountains." The whole room turned. A man stood in the doorway and the snow was melting on the shoulders of his long coat, and on his chest, catching the gray winter light, was a star. A federal star. "United States Marshal Aldous Reeve," the man said to the room, to the judge, to Josiah Crane, whose handsome face had finally at last gone the color of the snow behind him. "And I have spent the better part of 2 weeks in the saddle through some genuinely unpleasant weather, on the strength of a letter from a citizen who writes a clearer account of land fraud than any lawyer I have ever paid." His hard eyes moved across the room, across the sweating judge, across the man in chains, and came to rest on Maeve Donnelly, standing in her plain brown dress with the copy held high in her steady hand. "Mrs. Thorne, I presume," the marshal said. And Maeve, who was not Mrs. Thorne yet, who had been called a great many things in her life, but never that felt the word go through her like the first warmth of spring through frozen ground. "Not yet," she said. The marshal almost smiled. "Well," he said, "we had best fix the rest of this first then. What happened after happened fast, because the truth, once it is loose in a room, moves faster than any lie." The marshal had the original ledger. Amos had reached the mail. The mail had reached Reeve. And Reeve, who had broken one land ring already, and had been hungry for another, had read Maeve's clear, careful account, and ridden out almost the same day, racing the same winter that Crane thought was his ally. He had the ledger. He had the deed recovered from where Maeve's letter told him it was hidden. He had the federal seal, the real one, the genuine signature of the nation that Crane had spent years calling false. And he had questions about a man who fell off a trail he had ridden for 16 years. In the same week he wrote a letter saying he was afraid. It came apart for Crane, the way these things come apart. One thread, and then all of them. A bank clerk offered the choice between his employer and a federal noose, remembered things. A hired man the same. The story the whole town had swallowed about the monster on the mountain curdled in their mouths, and they looked at the handsome, grieving banker who had fed it to them, and they understood all at once what they had nearly helped him do. The judge recused himself in a hurry, suddenly remembering urgent business in another county. Reeve let him go. Reeve had bigger fish. And Josiah Crane was arrested in his own town in the room he owned by a man whose star he did not own and could not buy for the murder of Ezra Wells and the fraud of half a valley. They took the chains off Garrett. Maeve watched them do it. She watched the rope come off his scarred wrists, the same hands that had pulled her out of the fire, and she watched the big man stand up slowly in the suddenly silent room free. He looked at her across the crowd. He crossed the room. The whole town parted to let him through because nobody looking at his face now could find the monster they had been so sure of. There was only a large, tired, gentle man crossing a room toward a large, plain, extraordinary woman. He stopped in front of her. He did not say anything. He was not a man who said things, but he lifted one enormous scarred hand and he laid it against the side of her face, gentle as snow, and Maeve Donnelly, who had not cried when they took him, who had not cried through any of it, finally in front of the whole town, let herself, just once, just a little. "You came back," she said. "You did the finding out," Garrett said. And that in a room that had come to watch a hanging was the whole of it. They were married in May. On the porch, the way it should have been all along, the snow was gone from the valley by then, gone everywhere but the highest peaks, and the iris had come up wild around the cabin, blue and soft, and Maeve let Garrett pick them this time, and she put them in a jar on the table, and they did not go in the fire. Silas stood up as witness, talking the whole time, of course. Amos came back down out of the mountains where he had been minding the herd, and he said exactly 4 words during the entire ceremony, and the 4 words were, "She is the one," and everybody understood. He meant it as the highest thing a man could say. The marshal did not stay for the wedding. Marshals never do. But before he rode out he had shaken Maeve's hand, which he did not do for many people. And he had said one thing she kept for the rest of her life. "I have arrested a lot of clever men," Reeve said. "They all made the same mistake." They looked at the room and decided who did not matter. And every single time it was the one who did not matter who brought them down. I had looked at her, this hard, unhurried man with the star on his chest. "He never even saw you coming, did he?" Reeve said. "No," Maeve said. "Nobody does." "Good," said the marshal. "Keep it that way." And he rode down the mountain and out of the story the way the law does once the truth has been set loose. Garrett gave her a ring. He had made it himself, out of a piece of copper wire worked and polished until it caught the light. It was not elegant. It was not what a banker would have bought, not what a man in a good coat would have slid onto a soft white hand. It fit. "It fits," Maeve said, looking at it on her finger. "It does," Garrett agreed, and they both understood they were talking about more than copper wire. They were talking about the mountain and the room with enough space in it, and the 2 rough stones that had been called too jagged for the current, their whole lives, and had turned out to fit each other. Exactly. The seasons turned. The farm came back. The barn was rebuilt bigger by 3 brothers and a woman who could carry a beam as well as any of them. The herd grew. The stolen lands, the ones in Ezra's ledger, were given back claim by claim, family by family, to the people. crane had put off them, and more than one of those families came up the ridge that summer to shake the hand of the plain woman who had brought down the man who robbed them. Maeve found she did not mind being seen when it was for that, and in the second year, they had a daughter. A large, healthy, loud baby who came into the world with the same full-throated announcement her mother brought to everything, and they named her Hope, because that is what she was. The living proof that two people the world had called too much could make something the world would call beautiful. Years later, travelers through that valley would sometimes hear the story. The mountain man the whole town once called a killer, and the bride nobody wanted, who turned out to be the only one with eyes sharp enough to see the truth and steady enough to bring it home. They told it by the fire with warmth, with the particular affection people save for stories that let them believe there is someone for everyone. If you stop trying to fit and start looking for a place with enough room. The 5 brides who left were never spoken of unkindly. They were simply looking for a smaller life. There is nothing wrong with a smaller life. It is most of what people want. But Maeve Donnelly had never wanted a smaller life. She had wanted a place big enough to hold all of her, the size of her, the sharpness of her, the whole loud, large, unwanted everything of her. And she had found it on a mountain, with a man who took up the whole side of a room and had eyes like good soil after rain. In a valley with a sky over it big enough for any amount of a person, however much of them there is. She never once apologized for taking up space, and Garrett Thorne never once wished she took up less, because on that mountain at last, for both of them, there was room. There was room for his silence and her sharpness, room for the scars they came in with and the ones they earned together. Room for a burned barn rebuilt, and a stolen valley returned, and a copper ring that fit. Room for a daughter named Hope, and a porch and a sunset that finally, after all those cold years, had the audience it deserved. 2 of them every evening watching the western peaks catch fire. The big gentleman who had stopped believing anyone would stay, and the woman who looked through every door. The world slammed in her face and found behind the last one the only thing she had ever really wanted. Enough room, and the mountain held them, both of them, for good.